pre-movable type, we've talked about movable type. Now we're going to get into the principles of typography as it applies to digital typography. And we'll use these concepts for the rest of the semester as we work on our projects. What is display type? When we talk about display type, we're not talking about display type in the reference of, oh, it's display type, so it must be on a display in the digital environment. We're actually talking about the form and visual representation of the font. It's intended for use at large sizes, specifically headings. You see it on posters, flyers, and pretty much anything worthy of varying or accentuating, doesn't even word, an eccentric type. Accenting, that's what I was looking for. Titles, headlines, headings. This is generally over 14 points. Now, when I talk about points, I'm looking more specifically at print. If we were doing digital type, this would be something over 21 pixels, and we'll talk about that more as we do our projects. These are great examples of display types. Each one of these signifies the different font. Impact, Black Ops 1, Rockwell, Monotone, Bangers, Uniseal, Antiqua. These are all on Google Fonts, by the way, if you want to take a look at these. These are all display types. Now, they all are representing that impact at the top there, but they can be used for headings and to accentuate the section or type. Then we have body type. The classic body type size is 10 points. Modern, though, is 12. You're going to see that more and more, that when you're working with body type in print, you want it to be at least 12 points. It's blocks of text usually. The whole goal of body type is it should be legible. It shouldn't be confusing to the reader. If we're talking about digital font, the base for digital font is 16 pixels. That's for your body font. Again, 21 would be for display. Here's two different examples of body types. The one down below, it's actually a specific font style, but it's been that font style includes the italics. Like, that's not done on purpose. That's done on purpose because that's the font. We didn't go in and actually like change that to include italics. Here's the anatomy of typography. I do not want you to know all of this. I don't think it's relevant for our class that you know every single bit of the typography anatomy, but there are key things that you do need to understand because it will affect your projects and it will affect how we communicate to each other. I'm going to point those out to you right now. The biggest is going to be serifs. Serifs are those little ticks that you see on the edge of certain typographies. On certain fonts. If there is a serif, you will see the little accents there that dip down. If there is no serif, we call those sans serif fonts. Pretty simple, right? We see a lot of serif and sans serif fonts in the digital era, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, as well as on a future assignment. The bowl is the little dip here. I'm more interested in the counter because this, to me, actually brings a lot of design out of typography. That white space that you see in the counter brings the type out. I want you to be aware of the descender as well as the ascender. So the descender, which is here, and the ascender, which is here, that's what stretches the letter or the character above this X height. And those can be key when working with fonts and then working with styles, because you'll see in digital font specifically that the fonts ascenders or descenders vary widely when it comes to working with the font. The last thing I want you to be aware of is the overall cap height, as well as the point size, because those encompass the entire font area. And again, when we're working with digital font specifically, you'll see how those come into play and how some fonts have smaller point size, others have larger point size, same as cap height. It can vary in height and in degree. So that will be key when you're working with digital fonts, and I'll show you some examples of that when we get into our project for kinetic typography. So if you're going to take anything from this, understand what serif is, what non-serif is. Note the ascender, the descender, the cap height, the point size, the counter, and sorry, I didn't mention this, the baseline. Baseline is this area right below or right at the base of the type. It's also the bottom part of the X height. Type styles. In print, type styles are measured in points. In digital type, it's measured in pixels. 72 points per inch, that's roughly an inch. So you can get 72 points within 1 inch, more or less. It's very, very close. When we talk about resolution, we're talking about 72 pixels per inch. That applies only to digital typography. And again, we'll talk about that when we do our projects. Other forms of type style, we have bold, Roman, or normal. That's no styles applied to at all. Italic, underline, outline, shadow, strike through. All of these, I think you've seen in a Microsoft Word or online when you're editing something. Leading is the vertical space between each line. So in these 3 bullet points, leading, kerning, tracking, the leading would be the space between each line, the space between leading and kerning. Kerning is the reduction of horizontal space between characters, and visually you can see that right here. The kerning has been adjusted on all of those characters. Do not confuse this with tracking. Tracking is actually the overall space between all characters in a line. So kerning is the space between characters, tracking is the space between all of the characters as a whole. Things to consider when you're using type within projects. The use of one typeface with variations in style and size. You can take one type, modify it several different ways to visually create multiple variations of that type. You can combine sans serif with serif. Some people are going to fight me on this, but I do think that they can complement each other. For example, you could use sans serif for a heading and a serif font for your body type, or vice versa. Take chances with your fonts. Fonts can be part of your design, and so if you take that chance, you're pushing that envelope of your design. I would appreciate that. Avoid using similar typefaces. So when you're using multiple typefaces, you want ones that support each other but aren't the same or closely the same, because then you're not complementing, or you're not putting those variations in there. Select the typeface to match the project. Don't just select it because you think this is wild, this is crazy, I really like this font. Well, does it go with the project? Remember that. Type can be feminine, masculine, friendly, harsh, elegant, delicate. It's really surrounded around what you want to express within the project you're doing. I like to practice the design rules of three colors, three typefaces, three type sizes. If you keep these rules in play, you can easily apply three different variations within your projects. Determine objectives of the design project. So when you're handed an assignment or a project, determine what's the overall goal. What is the objective? What is the focus? Who's the audience that you're targeting? Consider the elements that are going to be included within the overall project, not just the font, but the colors, the brand styles, the animations, the actual surface that the design will go on, whether it be digital or print or other medium. Think about how the project would look most appropriate. Well, sorry. Think about how it's going to be projected onto that medium. I put here image, but it may not always be an image. But how is this going to be viewed? Sketch out your designs. You don't have to be a good artist or know how to draw, but sketch out some ideas, whether it be in paper or digitally. Remember your margins. Use your margins as part of your design. And then uneven proportions are most aesthetically pleasing than even proportions. This because it creates a complement between the two, and naturally, you interpret that more freely. If it's on the same line or the same medium, it doesn't create variety, it doesn't invite the viewer. And then let's talk a little bit about the business card. So your next assignment will be surrounded around a business card. We have one more lecture that I encourage you to watch before you dive into this, because it's going to go into how to use Adobe Illustrator if you don't know how to use that yet. But we are going to use the principles of style and type that we just talked about within our next assignment.